It has been a while since we have provided an update on the war in Gaza. Ever since the Israelis withdrew most of their troops from the Gaza Strip, the intensity of battles has significantly decreased. But this has not really improved the humanitarian situation in Gaza, as airstrikes and shelling persist, and thousands of civilians still find themselves in the crossfires of the war between Israel and Hamas. Israel has launched another ground assault on Gaza, this time on the southern city of Rafah. But many have started to question whether Israel has a clear endgame to the war, and if it has reached any of its goals. We will discuss these questions, describe the situation on the battlefield, and talk about the increasing threat of this war to regional stability in the Middle East. Fans of modern warfare would surely enjoy our series on the World War II North African campaign and Pacific War, available exclusively to our YouTube members and patrons via the links in the description and pinned comment. Join their ranks and watch the series on the Albigensian Crusade, Fall of Sparta, First Punic War, Italian Reunification Wars, History of Prussia, Biography of Sulla, Russo-Japanese War, Reconquista, Persian Wars, and War of Spanish Succession, and much more. Thanks for supporting us. Following the devastating October 7th attack by Hamas on the Israeli communities bordering Gaza, killing hundreds of civilians, Israel initially responded with a blockade and brutal campaign of airstrikes against the Gaza Strip, targeting both what they claimed to be Hamas infrastructure and civilian areas, including residential buildings, hospitals, schools, and mosques. This was followed by a ground invasion of the northern and central parts of the Gaza Strip on October 27th. The Israeli Defense Force quickly gained ground and took control of key roads and highways. Hamas and other Palestinian groups were not in a position to fight in a conventional way, thus opted to use guerrilla tactics against the IDF. This did not do much to prevent the Israeli advance in the Gaza Strip, but exacted a relatively high cost on the Israeli army. Hamas actively used its tunnel infrastructure and ruins of destroyed buildings to carry out ambushes on the IDF. It is difficult to say exactly how much Israeli equipment these hit-and-run tactics have destroyed or damaged, but social media channels of Hamas have been regularly posting videos of Israeli tanks and vehicles being hit by RPGs and explosives planted on them. According to the Armada Rota blog, there is visual proof of the destruction of 2 Israeli Merkava tanks and 1 Achzarit armored personnel carrier, along with damage to a further 31 tanks, 13 armored vehicles, and 3 infantry mobility vehicles. There may well be more destroyed IDF equipment, but it is simply next to impossible to verify the amount of their losses with the available evidence. In early April, it was reported that 260 Israeli soldiers had been killed since the ground invasion was launched. More than 1,000 have been injured. Predictably, Hamas claims to have killed more Israeli soldiers. At the peak of its ground assault in late December, the Israeli army had 4 divisions, operating from Khan Yunis in the south to the northern edge of the Gaza Strip. But on the 1st of January 2024, the IDF withdrew from North Gaza, claiming that they had destroyed the Hamas infrastructure there, which signaled the end of the highest intensity period of the war in Gaza, at least for the time being. However, almost immediately after they left, Hamas started firing missiles and shelling Israeli territory, indicating that the IDF did not actually manage to destroy Hamas. The IDF's central axis of advance eventually reached the city of Khan Yunis, but they withdrew from there in April. A single IDF brigade remained in the Netzarim corridor created by the Israelis. At this point, occasional battles occur around this area, but their intensity is lower than what was happening before 2024. The most noteworthy battles continued occurring in and around the Al-Shifa hospital, as the IDF conducted several raids on this hospital, claiming that it hosted Hamas infrastructure on its territory. For weeks now, the Israeli government has been telegraphing its intention to attack Rafah, a southern city of the Gaza Strip, which in comparison with Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and other major settlements, has been less destroyed and hosted the refugees from the rest of Gaza. The Israeli command states that Rafah is the last military stronghold of Hamas. Their argument is that destroying the infrastructure of this organization in Rafah and taking control of the Philadelphia smuggling route on the border with Egypt would derail the capacity of Hamas to operate as a military organization. As usual, the Israeli Air Force conducted a series of airstrikes on Rafah before conducting a ground invasion. On May 7th, the 401st Armoured Brigade captured the Gazan side of the Rafah border crossing. Israel has already ordered civilians in Rafah to evacuate to al-Mawasi. In our videos, we have already talked about the potential of the war in Gaza to ignite a wider conflict in the region. And the Battle of Rafah is interesting to analyze from that perspective. Netanyahu's insistence on a ground assault on Rafah was vehemently opposed by virtually all relevant international actors, including Israel's closest ally, the United States. The Americans have publicly and privately urged Israel to not launch an attack on Rafah. The White House spokesperson John Kirby told reporters a day before the ground assault that President Biden reiterated personally to Netanyahu that the United States does not support ground operations in Rafah. But this has not stopped Congress from voting to provide Israel with an additional aid package of $17 billion. The European Union has also urged Israel not to attack Rafah, stating concerns about dire consequences for the civilian population. Egypt is worried about the Rafah offensive due to the potential influx of refugees from Gaza. According to the Wall Street Journal, Egypt has warned Israel that their decades-old peace treaty may be suspended if the Israeli army launches an offensive on Rafah and if the Palestinian refugees flee Rafah for Egypt. Saudi Arabia, whose peace talks with Israel have been on hold since the start of the war, has also strongly urged Israel against attacking Rafah. But even without the IDF's assault on Rafah, the potential for regional destabilization continues to be massive. While there is a hot war going on in Gaza, a potential conflict between Israel and Iran has been the largest cause of worry for its disastrous potential consequences for global security. It is not a secret that Iran supports Hamas and other groups in Gaza, along with Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and a myriad of anti-American and anti-Israeli groups in Iraq and other countries of the Middle East. Since the start of the war, the Houthis have been attacking vessels moving through the Red Sea, accusing them of supporting Israel's war effort. Hezbollah and the IDF continue exchanging fire along the Lebanese border. Israel has also not been sitting idly and has been targeting Iran's military infrastructure throughout the Middle East. On April 1st, the conflict between Israel and Iran reached a very risky point of tension when the Israeli Air Force launched a deadly airstrike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, killing 16 people, including Brigadier General Zahedi of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Iran immediately stated that it would retaliate. Despite calls of Western countries not to respond and Israel's warnings about their own retaliation, Iran launched a massive missile and drone barrage on Israel 12 days later on April 13th. The IDF spokesperson Haggari stated that Iran fired 170 drones, more than 30 cruise missiles, and 120 ballistic missiles. The Iranian Chief of Staff, Bagheri, claimed that the primary target of the Iranian attack was the Nevatim airbase, which was used to attack the Iranian consulate. The Israeli air defense and American, British, French, and Jordanian jets were used to shoot down the vast majority of Iranian missiles and drones. 7 to 9 missiles struck Nevatim and Ramon airbases, but the damage was reportedly minor. Even before the Iranian Shahed drones completed their long and slow travel to Israel, Iran's representative in the UN declared that the matter was concluded from their side. Still, Israel vowed to retaliate against the Iranian attack. You already know where such a back and forth could lead, but Iran decided to downplay the April 19th Israeli missile or drone attacks, according to different sources, which reportedly did some damage to an airbase near the Natanz nuclear site. Some Arab media outlets claimed that the United States managed to persuade the Israeli government not to retaliate strongly against Iran in exchange for tacit approval of the Rafah offensive. But it is impossible to prove this allegation, as at least publicly, the Biden administration continues to urge restraint from Netanyahu with regards to their plans in Rafah. On May 9th, Biden warned Israel that if it enters Rafah, the United States will stop some of their weapon supplies. I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet, if they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities that deal with that problem. So the war in Gaza is about to enter another hot phase with the Battle of Rafah. But many keep asking this question: what has Israel achieved in this war so far? Does it have a clear understanding of what a victory would mean? and is the Rafah offensive going to bring this victory? All of this is unclear at this point. Israel's Prime Minister has declared two main objectives of this war: destruction of Hamas and release of hostages. What would qualify as the destruction of Hamas? A Reuters article from October 2023 cites a source that claims that the organization has some 40,000 fighters in its ranks. For obvious reasons, it is difficult to know exactly how many men fight in Hamas, but we can take this number as a benchmark. IDF officials have made different claims about the casualties suffered by Hamas, ranging from 10,000 to 13,000 Hamas fighters killed since the start of the war. The Israeli Defense Minister claims that they have destroyed 18 out of 24 battalions of Hamas. According to Reuters, a Hamas official told them in February that they had lost 6,000 fighters, but later other Hamas officials denied this number. So, recognizing that it is an extremely flawed method, but in the absence of a better way of moving forward, we can choose a middle ground between the aforementioned claims and speculate that Hamas has lost somewhere between 8 and 10,000 fighters. So, about a quarter of the available manpower after half a year of intense battles. This does not answer how many new members Hamas has gained due to the inevitable radicalization of ordinary Gazans as a result of widespread destruction and civilian loss. The fact that after the withdrawal of the Israeli troops from North Gaza, the area was used by Hamas militants to shell Israel, demonstrates that Hamas maintains its fighting capacity. The Israeli command has claimed they have found 1,600 tunnel shafts and destroyed hundreds of them. But the scale of Hamas's tunnel infrastructure is vast, even more so than Israel had expected. A retired IDF general, Yaakov Amidror, said, "I'm also not sure there's enough TNT in Israel to destroy all the tunnels." Tunnels have helped Hamas preserve manpower and its military and political leadership, which can be another criterion to use for our analysis. Has Israel been able to destroy the leadership of Hamas? Well, yes and no. The IDF has managed to kill some Hamas leaders. Saleh al-Aruri, whom Netanyahu apparently referred to as the number 4 of Hamas, was killed in an airstrike in Lebanon in January. Marwan Issa, who the Israeli media believes to be the number 3, was killed in March 2024 in another Israeli airstrike on Nuseirat. Several other senior military commanders have been killed as well. But the two main leaders of Hamas operating in Gaza are still alive: Yahya Sinwar, the most senior political leader of Hamas in Gaza, and Mohammed Leif, an elusive head of the Al-Qassam Brigades, the military wing of Hamas, and the mastermind behind the October 7th attacks, are still alive. The leader of the political bureau of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, is currently in exile in Qatar and alive as well. So the situation is quite similar to the one with Israel's damage to the manpower of Hamas. It is considerable, but probably not at the level to disrupt the operation of Hamas. The key leaders are still alive, while a war as devastating as the one going on in Gaza right now inevitably hastens the rise of new ones. Thus, the fact that resistance to the IDF invasion of Gaza is still active and does not look like it's going away anytime soon, even if the IDF succeeds in capturing Rafah, indicates that Israel has not yet achieved its goal of destroying Hamas. The question is whether it is a viable goal at all. An expert on the Arab-Israeli conflict, Nathan Thrall, said, "After Israel declared that it had defeated Hamas in the north, you see that every week Israeli soldiers are dying in the north, so it's evident that Hamas will continue to exist after this war, whether Israel invades Rafah or doesn't invade Rafah. Hamas is a major power on the ground, and will remain so at the end of this war." Israel's former national security advisor, Eyal Halata, argues that there is no way this will end when Israel can say we are victorious. Israel lost this war on the 7th of October. The only question now is if we are able to remove from Hamas the ability to do this again. And we might succeed, and we might not. Another Middle East expert, Khaled El-Gindi, said that the current Israeli policy in the name of destroying Hamas, which causes mass civilian casualties in Gaza, will create new threats to Israel's security. I think even American officials realize belatedly that it's complete madness, that people are allowing this horror to continue as though the goal of destroying Hamas was more important than anything else in the world, including Israel's own future security. It's divorced from reality. Because even if you destroy Hamas, you're creating something that will be much worse in the future. Because now you have 30,000 people who are dead, 17,000 orphans. What is their view of Israel and the United States going to be when they grow up? What about another stated goal of Israel's military campaign, the release of hostages captured by Hamas on October 7th? This issue is causing a lot of anger and concern in Israel lately, as the people in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem have been protesting the government's perceived inaction or indifference to the plight of the hostages. It has been the trigger of a political crisis of sorts in Israel, raising calls for the government to resign. In November 2023, Israel and Hamas managed to strike a deal which led to the release of 105 hostages, but an estimated 134 more still remain in Hamas captivity. There are only a handful of confirmed cases of rescue of hostages as a result of military operations. On April 24th, Hamas released a video of an Israeli hostage, Hersh Goldberg-Polin, in which he stated that some 70 hostages had been killed by the Israeli airstrikes. Obviously, hostages can be inclined to say the things that their captors forced them to say under duress. But it is beyond doubt that at least some captives may have inadvertently been killed in Israeli airstrikes. Some others could have been tortured by Hamas or succumbed to the injuries suffered during the October 7th attack. It is impossible to know exactly how many hostages remain alive, as only Hamas is in a position to have this knowledge. The US, Qatar, and Egypt have been trying to broker another deal to ensure the release of the remaining hostages, but the sides remain far apart in their expectations. In a nutshell, Hamas wants the release of the remaining hostages to be tied to a permanent ceasefire, while the Israeli government seeks only a temporary halt of fighting until the release of all hostages is secured. So Israel has managed to achieve the release of more than 100 hostages thanks to the ceasefire agreement in November, but barring an unexpected turn of events, Israel does not seem likely to make sure that the rest of the captives are freed in the short term. Thus, Israel has only partially achieved this goal of the war as well. On top of not being able to achieve or only partially achieve the stated goals of its military campaign, Israel has also damaged its international reputation on a massive scale. More than 30,000 Palestinians have already been killed in Gaza as a result of the Israeli airstrikes and ground invasion, with the humanitarian situation already being well past the point of disaster. Israel has been accused of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and regular war crimes, as international sympathies, which were on their side on October 7th, have definitively turned against them in the face of the horrifying situation in the Gaza Strip. The Battle of Rafah is going to be another major talking point of the war in Gaza, but many question how it's going to bring Israel closer to its stated goals of dismantling Hamas and releasing hostages. Hamas has been weakened, but it is still capable of waging a guerrilla war against the IDF, and it will likely be the case even if Israel decides to station its troops in Gaza permanently. Many hostages still remain in Hamas captivity, and a deal to ensure their release, or any larger deal to end the war for good, does not appear imminent at this point. The brutal war in Gaza continues. As Khaled El-Gindi said, "I think the war has already far exceeded anybody's expectations in terms of its duration and intensity and scale and deadliness, and there's no end in sight." We will talk more about this war in the coming weeks, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video. To watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.